What's up, folks? Happy new Battle Pass season! Ooh, I love these days. Today is Monday, and it is the first day of the Custodes Battle Pass, as shown here. We've got a pretty thorough and stacked developer blog on here, and I love to talk about these on the day that the season launches, so you can kind of look at what you're going to do for this season, which warlords you're going to play, what bodyguards you're going to try out, that kind of stuff. So, I'm going to dive right in. There's a lot to cover, and brace yourselves. There are a lot of updates in here that threw me for a loop. It is entirely possible you've already seen this. If you have, no worries. Hopefully my commentary will still be fun. All right, so as we leave the mastery and technology and warfare of the Tau behind, we dive straight into the martial prowess and determination of Custodes. I wonder if it's going to be a melee season. The mightiest of humanity's warriors. Humanities. Is that a... The writing warriors. Okay, all right. As with the previous Shadowstone season, this season sees the introduction of the latest Supreme Commander, Ghazghkull Thraka, who is awesome. Again, melee season. The Wa cannot be stopped, and Ghazghkull is already on the loose, getting ready for a good crumpin' before the season has even started. Yes, and both Shinto Bean and I have done Warlord guides on him. Totally different content, so check them both out. They're both short. Should be fun. Can the Guardians of the Golden Throne withstand this onslaught? They're full of shields, so probably. Could there be a commander of supreme proportions ready to save the day? This was actually a big surprise for me. I actually do plan to do a video that's talking about the supreme commanders from every single faction, since that's kind of a new idea introduced in Warhammer 10th edition. It's something that I'm still kind of catching up on, and there is a Lord Solar dude on a horse who this might be teasing. We'll see. He's new after the fall of Cadia, which didn't happen because Cadia stands. With the wall already in full swing and humanity's finest engaged at the front lines, let's head straight into the balance changes. Right off the bat, this is one of the cheapest cards in the game. I believe she's still 3 points. Might be 4. I think she's 3. Cavallanera Brassanas. I've never actually said that. Plus 5 cost, plus 45 wounds, plus 20 range. Swaps a wounds upgrade for a range upgrade and changes from precision shot to barrage, which makes her an extremely cheap barrage for Servants of the Emperor, which makes her a really good pick for Greyfax. I believe that total cost is still 8 points, might be 9, but something in that range. Having a Sister of Silence as one of the cheapest cards available to SOE has always felt a bit off, sure. So Cavallanera, when you write these, you don't have to say them out loud, is seeing a significant glow up and increase in points to match her status. While still cheap enough to fill a support role, her increased wounds and range should mean she makes for far more of an impact. Also, taken the limiter off her Witchseeker Flamer, which has changed her trait from Precision Shot to Barrage, all the better to toast pesky Psychers. Now, as a main Eldari Psyker player, I'm hurt, but it's a great upgrade. Really awesome. Cheap Precision Shot is cheap Barrage is something that servants don't have a ton of access to, and that could be really strong with a lot of upgrades out there. So that's cool. Here, there's a ton of Custodian updates. Just to go ahead and talk about this generally, basically all of the Custodians have felt like meat shields that didn't hit very hard, were fairly expensive, and could excel in some decks, but in terms of punchy melee prowess, basically always fell behind most other things. So you're going to see a ton of Custodians here to go with the Battle Pass season. These are also almost exclusively older cards, so players who've been at this for a while and have a lot of these at higher level should seriously benefit from this, which is awesome. So first, the Bike Rider, plus 10 costs. Plus 40 wounds, plus 20 range, plus 20 melee. That again is base, so that means that the levels you'll get will make him a dramatically more powerful piece. Following a similar theme, the Virtus Praetor is getting a big jump in points and a significant increase in all stats. It's always seemed strange that bringing a bike gives you a discount, true, compared to the other Custodes, so Heracles now fits in where he should be in the roster. Delivers much more punishing attacks and has the benefit of being a potent all-rounder now in any list, but especially useful in the normally melee-focused Custodes, which is awesome. He's a really nice... I've just always liked him for having a nice balance. He's fairly cheap, still has outflank. Has a nice combo of melee and ranged attacks, which I always liked, and they've been equally buffed. So he's just a really good all-rounder now, dramatically better, even if he is more expensive. The stats make a lot more sense at that points cost than his current stats did even at the current points cost. So Captain Adronitis has hit like a wet noodle forever, but is always in there just as a tank piece that's really hard to get through. Despite being Shield Captain, Adronitis has felt like one of the most junior of the available Custodes, being one of the lowest cost options with fairly underwhelming stats. With a bump in cost to cement the feel of seniority, he always felt like an Initiator Junior or something. mainly into his primary melee attack to make him feel and hit like a Custodes shield captain should. +3 cost, not dramatic. +20 wounds, ooh. +8 range and +25 melee. So he's definitely a punchy, get in there, stabby bit. Hey, look, melee season. Dalit Hap Euremides is one I've actually said out loud because Dalit Hap is just fun to say. +10 wounds, +10 range, +10 melee. Cool. And I believe he also has shields. Arguably the most correctly priced of all the current Custodes. Sure, see him a lot. As a Terminator equivalent, sits at the right place in the roster, but could certainly hit harder. Very true. And now he does. Nice. All Custodes now feel like a threat on the field. Yeah, I love it. And then, of course, so now I have put decks together that were pure Custodes. There isn't really a Warlord that feels right for that yet. But it's something you could certainly do, and it's something I've played around with Creed. Sarkar Creed is pretty great with melee and shields redeploying repeatedly, and with these guys punching harder, that's definitely going to be a more viable deck. Especially with this guy, Trajan Valoris, Captain General, yeah. It would be a shame to leave out the main man himself, so we haven't. Well, Trajan hasn't struggled, Drew, perhaps as much as the rest of the Custodes lineup. He certainly hasn't been at the front and center, often, Sentry, often being overshadowed by other options. Well, no longer. With this significant increase in melee, he should be much easier to reach for when building melee SOE decks, which is great. He's always been a really good pick for me with Cannon S. Terrific in that role. That's my ideal place, but as you start running melee decks with more of the Custodians, he's going to be a great key piece to have in there, and just a cool looking model. Orcs, the arrival of Gaz. This is great. Orcs just got kind of a general buff, especially to some of the best cards to go with Gaz. Weird. But even if you don't pick up Gaz, these are a really nice buff to the faction in general. These are some pretty common pieces to take, mostly. And so this is just a general all-around buff to Orcs, which is nice, because Orcs have been kind of struggling a bit in general. First, we have Sneaky Grok, the endless, I believe, 5-point Goth Clan Orc Boy. +5 wounds, +5 range, +5 melee. Just 5s. Love it. Well, just a simple Orc Boy, even the lowliest of Orcs should feel like a threat. No longer just cannon fodder. I mean, +5 still leaves him in the cannon fodder range, but Sneaky Grok is cannon fodder that will hit you hard enough to make you remember him. Yeah, it's true. It's good. Goth Rocker, I will not remember him. I mean, it's got the, 80s, very much a throwback 80s vibe to the original Orcs. Side note, I'm loving seeing Orcs get the highlight because a lot of the stuff I love in Warhammer Combat cards, I love because I also love it on the physical tabletop, and most of it I also play as well or have played. Orcs are the army that I will never play, but I love that they exist. They just make me so happy. Orc players are great. Orc models are great. Orc lore is great, you little fungal monsters. Love it. So, Goth Rocker, the boys are back in town, but this is no Backstreet Boy. The Goth Rocker wants to be right up in the action for all the boys to hear. Despite being one of the cheapest Inspiring Presence option available, he often gets passed over, which is fair. He's a newer card, mine is low level, he's just not necessarily worth it. As he gets higher level, I think he will be, especially in Ghazghkull decks, because they do punch extremely hard and really benefit from having a balance of heavy hitters and cheap cards, which is exactly where you want a cheap Inspiring Presence card. So, love it. A good bump in offensive stats to complement his large wounds total. Wonder what that was for. Should give him a lot more threat and make him much more appealing. All right, we'll bring it, Goth Rocker. Fine, you sold me. Haka Buzzkill, also one of my favorites. Haka's ranged attack has always been irritatingly small, not even being able to take out an Akaran bodyguard. I absolutely believe that if a card has a ranged attack under 5, it is basically useless. It will strip a shield and that's it. Unless you get a card that has much lower hit points than it should. If it's sitting on like 1 or 2 hit points, fine. But I always consider if I'm going to bring a card with dual attack stats, I really want to make sure that it has a minimum of 5 in every attack stat it has. So I love to see this. And that is base. So he's actually going to have a not insubstantial shooting attack at high level. Well, no longer. And while we're here, we made sure his axe dealt a bit more damage, +5. It is as big as he is after all. Great model. I do really love that orc model, so that's another cool one. And he's kind of a staple of my decks. Is a decent pick in some of your Ghazghkull decks, but just is a good kind of melee mainstay at, 14 points? Brickfist is in the running to be my first max level card. I've had him forever. There have been a bunch of campaigns for him. He comes up in the card shop a lot. I've been angling to get this guy to max level first, so I love to see this. +10 wounds, +3 range, +5 melee. He's a staple of Zagstruck decks, and is somewhat useful in the other decks, but you just don't see him as much, because he's not as good if he's not auto-attacking. While the Storm Boys are a staple in any Zagstruck deck, I swear I didn't read ahead on that one. You barely see them anywhere else. I swear I didn't read that whole line. But with a bit more fuel in the jetpack, he should hopefully be much more at home in a lot more decks. And I've been thinking a lot more about pushing alpha attacks that are decks that really lean on scout. So you get really high bonus on your attack stats before you attack, and he's a perfect spot to fit in there. Has that melee scout, decent attack himself for the cost, and plays right into what I was hoping to do. I love it. Gorzag Gitstompa, another one that came up immediately when Gaz was released with his whole damage based on wounds, because this guy has always had a massive wound pool, which now is plus 20 base, plus 3 range, plus 5 melee, and also has Berserk. The Displace Knob from Gorka Morka is now available to everyone, nice, but may seem somewhat underwhelming. Yeah, his stats are not terrific because there was a concern he would get a little bit out of hand with Berserk, which he really doesn't. But has to take a lot of flack given his taunt trait. Ooh, did that change? He's epic, so I think he has both. I'll check that. Anyway, he's around the 20 cost point range and then has Berserk, if I recall correctly. Did he change that taunt? Man, I gotta keep up. No, okay, he's got Berserk and secondary taunt. Okay. Given that while Berserk is going to help after taking a couple of rounds of taunt damage, he's going to have a very short window to deliver value. An increase in offensive value output always helps. There are several things, though, there that make him a really great piece in Gaz decks, so still definitely worth looking at, and a buff is not unwelcome. Stompa Chompa, again, one that leans on, and this is actually straight from the notes, I did read these ones, one that has really had awesome hit points, plays really, really well in a, what's his face, Mozrog, the beastie one that heals when you attack. But just takes a very, very long time to ramp up damage based on that Berserk and can die early. So for those who've been watching the balance changes the past few seasons closely, you'll recognize the pattern here. As once one of the premium Berserk cards, the trait has not quite kept up with the increased lethality of the current meta. I talked about that a lot, especially with the rollout of secondary traits and a lot of epic cards getting a secondary trait Berserk, which is yay, plus 6 damage per turn at max. Woo! Yeah, so giving the Stompiest Chompiest Squig a bit more bite and DACA is overdue, and it helps this fan favorite going. Love it. And he's also so good in so many Orc decks. I really like Stompa Chompa. Good to see him get a little shine there. Before diving into the other factions, we know with the arrival of Supreme Commanders, some of the existing Warlords may seem to have lost some of their shine. And while the massive difference in cost will always separate them, it's only fair to revisit some of the classics. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. Well, not a full overhaul, which some may want or deserve, which we may see. They're getting a meaningful glow up with each other faction getting a buff to an older or lesser used Warlord. This part made me so happy. So let's do it. And just a note there on the Supreme Commanders, I've said often, I'll keep saying it, the Supreme Commanders and Super Heavies are very, very powerful, particularly at higher level, but they are in danger of being overwhelmed. So there's definitely a place for the cheaper Warlords, and a lot of those are starting to see their points come down so that they can compete more directly with the Super Heavies just on efficiency. Love it. Eldari, Zephyr Blade. I'm not gonna skip. Plus 20 wounds. Love it. While a Warlord with a fixed value rule, Zephyr Blade still competes well in the early and the mid game. True, he's the cheapest Eldari Warlord, has a trait that really benefits ranged attacks, even if it's just a chip increase. At that point, he begins to falter, so higher. When you get up into max card levels, he tends to fall a little bit apart because his trait isn't as valuable as some of the others like Illic. And so a good buff in wounds, very nice, should help him last out those key stages of the game where every wound matters. Unless you're winning by a good clip, if Zephyr Blade hits the table, you're probably going to lose the game. So I really, really appreciate this change. This is great. And again, that's base, so at higher level, that will give him a significantly bigger health pool to reflect his jumpy, dodgy wings. The Vizark! This made me so happy. I use this guy all the time, which is somewhat unusual, probably very unusual. So I love to see him buffed, because he's an excellent piece, especially in melee-centric decks where he can just exist as a melee puncher, but also has the added bonus of being taunt with a massive health pool. So where Yvain goes, the Vizark follows. And with the recent buff, her recent buff, it's only fair that her loyal bodyguard gets the same treatment. Oh yeah. Often touted as too expensive for his role as a taunt card. I mean, with the amount of melee damage he already did, I did not find that. However, that seems to be the prevailing wisdom. So his plus 10 base melee and wounds will make him a tank, which I love it. Taunt card, 20 plus taunts cards are coming into vogue, sure. And we want to make sure his blue fur collar keeps up with the latest fashion trend. One of my favorite models to paint ever was the Vizark. I love painting that one. He's never been a slouch in combat, sure, but now should be absolutely devastating whether he survives 2 turns or not. I love the Vizark in Avatar decks. He's so good. I also really like him in Eldrad decks where I run him with Yvrain. So this is going to be phenomenal. Because that guy, plus Yvrain with the Inspiring Presence, the two of them pack a wallop in melee, and will keep your other Psychic cards alive for the follow-up buffed Psychic attacks. Prismatic Paradox, Harlequin Voidweaver. Always one I've really liked as the budget barrage, but is one of the first ones I take out when I'm kind of trimming points. So -2 cost is awesome here. Keeping up with the 30-plus point barrage cards... Keeping up with 30-plus point barrage cards can be difficult as a premium slot, sure. And rather than compete with options in that bracket, the Harlequins have fallen back to shine on a different stage. Offering barrage now at a more efficient price point without stepping on the toes of the cheaper infantry options should see them take center stage. This is great. They have great hit points and a decent base attack, so that's a really powerful piece. Great in Illic or Zephyrblade, and really, really good. That's definitely one to look at if you're starting out. If you have a couple levels of Prismatic Paradox, very good in early game, especially with the now buffed Zephyrblade. Necrons. So I will say, I talked to Harry, our dear Mad Emperor, the developer here, about some reworks to other classic Warlords, and he just sort of waffled and rebuffed and said that's not in the cards, and completely neglected to mention that this entire mess was coming out, especially this one. And Shinto Bean did his Warlord reviews and called the Corpse Lord deck a meme deck, which was pretty funny. But repair protocols, when one of your friendly cards readies, they gain plus 10 health is the old rule, plus 25 health is the new rule. So anytime one of your cards readies, whether that's for a scout or whether that's for actually readying for not having the attack type that you use, they gain 25 wounds, which stacked on top of a high level regen is a significant healing every turn, especially in a faction that has a ton of Medicae. So the combination of Medicae, regen, and Corpse Lord is going to make him just very difficult to take down. And I love this because the 10 really did not keep up with the damage you were taking in game. The 25 probably will. Did not increase his cost, didn't remove his Medicae trait, so that's a lot of hit points. While again in the camp of fixed value Warlords, the Corpse Lord has always struggled, even among others. He's probably the weakest Warlord in the entire game up to this point. Despite being in a faction with incredible stats that just want to be loaded into a deck, he has not competed at all in the trait, and so this is really nice. While not a full rework, close. The significant increase in his regenerative power should at least give him a chance to shine brighter. Yeah, I like that. That's cool. So great reason to pick him back up again if you haven't. A really nice nod to newer players who will benefit more from that healing at low-level games and with fewer cards in the game on the board. Implacable Vanguard. This guy just never justified taking because you've got the Endless right next to him, and then you've got some other stuff right nearby him too, so you can go a little bit cheaper or a little bit more expensive. Given the increase in success in the number of smaller barrage cards, given the increase in success of a number of smaller barrage cards that have seen buffs, okay, so tough sentence. That's my bad. It's not as bad as I thought, but I lost it. Anyway, focusing on the glass cannon high impact roll for this Necron Classic makes sense. Cool. Increasing damage output is always valuable, and the Immortal will surely see the same benefit as others have. That is really cool. He's an excellent piece in a Corpse Lord, of course, and then also in a Stormlord. So Emotech, the Stormlord, really likes cheap, efficient ranged cards, and he really fits the bill. Especially if you play him fairly late in the game, you can get some pretty devastating attacks there. With both the Corpse Lord and the Stormlord really enjoying mixed attack types, where you can switch off between melee and ranged to get the buffs, but then also to get the healing and the free damage from the Stormlord. Both, yeah, that's pretty cool. We're going to see a renaissance there. Also a deviation from this being a melee season, although I just talked about mixed attack types. Necrons only have 2 attack types, and one of them is melee. So, next up, Vengeance of Sekemtar. This one is one of the single most common Necron cards I see anywhere, especially if you're talking about mixed attack types. He's got a great melee stat, tons of hit points, and benefits from alternating attack types where he builds up your attacks and has a good counterattack in melee, but probably needed a buff. He has a good wound pool, but this adds to it, which makes him more able to build up that Berserk, and benefit also at later levels from the mixed attack types. It's great. Plus 10 wounds, plus 5 melee. Another classic Berserker getting a bit more help. More wounds are always great, and a better melee helps it start strong out of the gate. Cool. I really love to see that when there's kind of mainstay standard old cards that still see a ton of play, still get a bump up to the point where they're a little bit more effective. That's great. That rewards longtime players, will help newer players get kind of up to speed. I like that. Tau. Once upon a time, Commander Farsight had no ranged attack whatsoever, which was a real bummer when you run up against shielded warlords in the end game. So that he's got ranged is great, but now it going up even more is awesome. So he now actually has a somewhat meaningful ranged attack. Being one of the most expensive Tau warlords, his cost has left his build options a bit more restricted. And while 2 points isn't going to make an enormous difference, that's the difference between a 2-point drone and a 4-point drone. That's no joke. Isn't going to make an enormous difference to list varieties. It does give a bit more flexibility while also taking him out of big game hunter range. That's huge. Being a mostly melee warlord, he was extremely vulnerable to getting shot, especially by big game hunter, before actually getting to pull off an end game. And he's a really fun warlord. He was one of my first successful ones, so I appreciate seeing him get a nod. We've increased his range a bit too, where base +5 is going to be pretty significant as he levels up. If that massive melee attack doesn't close the job, he isn't left quite as high and dry as before. Yeah, love this. And a lot of these tweaks we're seeing to older warlords, they, like as mentioned, they don't necessarily fall into the line of a complete rework, but in terms of how they're going to play, it's pretty close. This is really dramatically going to change all of these guys. Next up, Shazvrek Heldai. We've got, excuse me, checking the time. Sweet. Good. Blah, blah, blah. This is also a staple that is played in most Tau decks. You see him come up a lot. So I love to see him get a little bit of love too, because he's mostly included just as a shield card, but this makes a couple nods here. Shazvrek Heldai is a good card, but always struggles when it comes to performance. He doesn't put out enough damage, I think. Oh, opinion. I think that it comes down to being quite such an all-rounder. Yeah, so he's got anything that has a variety of attack types and stats and traits will suffer for that in terms of the individual value of each. Not quite punchy enough for the top tier burst damage decks, not tanky enough for the resilient decks, with better options for either of those two rules available at the same or lower price point. You can go a much cheaper higher damage or a much cheaper higher durability or a much cheaper similar durability in the 12-point shield. Hopefully an increase to both damage and resilience, love it, means Heldai get a bit more of a look for either playstyle. And his damage is not insignificant, but that buff is really going to be meaningful here too. Especially look for him in Shaz O decks that really like the combination of reliability and durability and firepower. Great piece. This one recently saw, it was one of the just completely runaway best cards in the entire game, certainly in Tau. Was in basically every single Tau deck, and then got a pretty heavy nerf and hasn't fully recovered, so I appreciate this touch. Barracuda is another good card, but over the last year or so, post-fix, has seen a steady decline in play. Looking at the cards that have taken its place, when introduced, the Barracuda was the supreme slot for maximum firepower. Since that time, other cards have been released that outstrip it in raw performance, particularly with some of the Lords of War, which offer far more for only a comparatively small jump in price. By the other token, relying on the key piece can often set you up for a fall. True. So it's so many points in general that it tends to take up the majority of your deck, especially if you ever considered including it in one of the higher cost warlords, such as Farsight or Supreme Commander Shadowsun. Now this combined with Farsight means that you can now run a Barracuda in a Farsight deck for 4 points less, which is awesome, and that really starts to add up very quickly. By the other token, relying on one key, yeah, the Tau decks often now usually diversify into 2 to 4 key pieces. This has left the Barracuda slightly stranded in the middle. While a small cut in points should help this issue, any further points decrease without a cut in their stats is hard to justify. Yeah, it's still really powerful. So this will be one that will continue to be watched. I love this card. I have a decently leveled one. I really leaned on it a lot, but one of the reasons I'm not playing it as much is just I'm trying other stuff that I couldn't justify taking before. But I do miss it. I will be happy to bring it back into the fold. Space Marines! Oh, Voldus, the... probably the Space Marine warlord that I've dunked on the most. So Grandmaster Voldus, Grey Knights Grandmaster, -6 cost. Woo! Next up is Voldus. His stats have always been fantastic. He's at okay hit points and very good attack stats across the board. And he's got all 3, which is very rare. And his rule has always been strong. Also very true. He just free buffs Psychers. The key issue, however, is how to make the most of it. Since there's a reliance on a fuller deck, and unlike many factions, Space Marine Psychers don't come cheap. This is where he's fallen down. A big drop in points, big. Should take a huge stack of his rigid deck builds, give players more chance to freedom and freedom to experiment, and has the added benefit of taking him out of big game hunter range. So we're again seeing a trend where the big game hunter warlords are going to be a lot more the super heavies, the supreme commanders, and a lot of the others again are competing more on efficiency. They will be less vulnerable to big game hunter, which is great. Voldus's hit points are okay, but if you start taking the extra damage from a big game hunter, that really, really hurt him. So this is awesome. This will let you squeeze in 1 or 2 more Psychers into those decks, or 1 or 2 more cards. That's a whole card. But yeah, I really, really appreciate that one. He definitely needed some help. It didn't impact his stats at all, too, so he's still a pretty strong contender. Aha, I believe he's still infantry, though, so watch out for Artemis and that anti-infantry attack. Brother Varian, we'll get to that guy in a minute. Blood Angel Sanguinary Guard, plus 30 wounds, woo! And plus 5 base melee, very nice. It's always been an uphill struggle to compete with Brother Baron, who's the 14-point Dark Angel's Terminator, as a taunt piece in Space Marine decks because of his cost. He's around 20, I believe. So instead of slashing Varian's points, which wouldn't suit an elite Sanguinary Guard anyway, yeah, he is now trying to stand out as a more premium piece to justify his cost. He now offers more wounds, more melee, and a secondary attack type versus his direct competition, who had the 14-point has no ranged attack at all. So this is really good. Varian's ranged attack is pretty decent. And then plus 30 base wounds is going to make him extremely tanky. Comfortably over 200 wounds at mid-level, if I'm not mistaken. Increase in price should now feel much more worth it. Yeah, I like that. This is going to be fairly minimal, but considering how good his melee attack was already, you're going to feel that. So in melee decks that need a little more tankiness but don't want to give up the punch, this guy's going to be a really great piece. Because Brother Baron's melee attack sucks. He doesn't do any significant damage. He's just there as a cheap taunt. So that's cool to see. I will certainly try him again. Epistolary Tantus. Also, I pretty much always pass up because of the cost, and boop. -2 cost, plus 10 wounds, plus 5 psychic. This is the one, I believe he's 24 points right now. Ultramarines Primaris Librarian. Tantus has been the baseline for Space Marine Psychers since the game was launched, but that boundary has shifted over time with updates and new releases. A reduction in cost means Tantus should get more play, and picks beyond being more available than other potential options. And here again, in a Voltus deck, he now is a net gain of 8 points. So if you had Tantus in your Voltus deck, Voltus -6, him -2, 8 points you can now play with and spend on other Psychers or other cards. That's great. And again, being an older card, that benefits a lot of the player base, which I really appreciate to see. So, cool. Chaos! I'm so excited. Ahriman, Bolt of Change, the most useless ability ever, is now not. It is pretty bonkers now. So Bolt of Change was just at the start of each player's turn, a card would randomly get either a friendly card would get healed or an enemy card would get hit for damage. Enemy cards would be healed either, or would be damaged either for 1 or 20 damage. And friendly cards would be healed either, Yes, so enemy cards would be damaged either 1 or 20, friendly cards would be healed either 1 or 20, and 1 was just such a slap in the face, so useless. So that's been changed. Instead of 1 or 20, it's now 5 or 30. This still is a dramatic improvement over what it used to be, where it was a random value between 1 and 20, so you never knew what it was going to do. I love this min-max a bit. The damage and healing of up to 30 is going to be incredibly impactful. I really love to see this because Ahriman as a warlord I pass up because I considered the trait essentially blank, and he himself didn't really justify it enough for me to take him. And I love him as a character, phenomenal model. Tzeentch is my favorite Chaos God, so I'm super pumped about this. I saw this and just like all caps message Terry was like, yes! So, very excited. While keeping the core of the unpredictability, this meaningful buff means that even the weakest trigger can pop injured cards more reliably, especially Acheran cards. That is huge. Any damage under 5 has just that giant glaring hole in usability, so I really appreciate that. And the highest value triggers make a significant impact. A random 30 swing is really good. That feels meaningful. Given there's no knowing or control on when or where it's going to hit, increasing its value seems only fair. Yeah, the randomness is the biggest weakness. Especially if games are shorter, you just get so few opportunities for it to trigger at all. Ahriman has always been a strong card in his own right. Yeah, he's a powerful hit, but he's a glass cannon. But his rule could often be unnoticed come the end of the fight. Yeah. This should put that straight and make the dicing with fate each battle feel more real and more impactful. I'm so pumped for this. Really, I love that. That is great. Then we have Takrath Kulis, Crimson Slaughter Raptor. This one I also really like, but yeah, the wounds did feel a little lackluster. He's very cheap and has a great trait in Fear, but it's just I've been using him less and less as more cards have entered Chaos. So, despite cheap access to Fear normally being really strong, Takrath just doesn't seem to be popular. And it's, I think, a lot of competition in that points cost, where Chaos is trying to squeeze in the really high points cost stuff and then just trying to get by with the cheapest stuff, and he's just expensive enough to be hard to justify. Added to the fact that a large number of Night Lords have just dropped, he may have to fight even harder for that role. Yeah, it's only fair to give him a bump up. The Night Lords cards, I'm super excited to see those too. But that is great. He's another mainstay piece, a very old card. Mine, I think, is level 12. Yeah, so appreciate seeing that. I'll definitely take him more. And then this one, I have talked often about how Chaos Ranged really does suffer. And this is a teeny tiny buff, but it's not nothing. And I'm really excited to see it in this card especially, because Frenix Shatterhowl, both a really cool model, is also a very high damage barrage card. So Chaos Range builds have always been the third choice for most players, if that. And the Noise Marine as a mono ranged card struggles because of that, making him significantly cheaper at -3 cost, which is great. Should make that normally very tempting powerful barrage into a more serious contender. We are seeing a lot more very good Chaos Ranged cards spread across the cost spectrum. I do think there's something there that I might play with, but I really appreciate seeing that build option fleshed out a bit, because they should be on par with Marines in terms of shooting, and they're just not. So yeah, I like to see it. Oh, this one. Oh god. So I had just sent the all caps message about Ahriman, and then I got to this one, which could not make me happier. Parasite of Mortrex. This is a lot of text, but long story short, when a Tyranid card makes an attack, when an enemy card is attacked in melee for the first time by a card in a Parasite deck, it would become infested so that when it dies from any cause, it would do damage in a bubble to all adjacent enemy cards. To all adjacent cards that are friendly to it. I'm making this confusing. Anyway, it used to be that attack would be 40% damage, so you would deal less than half damage on your initial alpha strike. Then it became 60 more recently, so you do a little bit more than half damage on your initial attack. Now it is 110%. So in a Parasite deck, if you're hitting a card in melee for the first time, instead of hitting it for just over half damage, you're going to hit it for 10% over your base damage. So you actually do more damage when dealing the infest attack, which is such a massive buff. It's totally ridiculous. I am playing the Parasite all day long in this season. And that target becomes infested. So that is the change, that it goes from just over half to more damage than your base melee, which that's percent based. So if you were hitting with very high damage melee cards, you could kill these things outright on the first turn, which is awesome. Like, this is one of my favorite warlords, one of the coolest rules, one of the single most key pieces in making melee a credible attack type in the game. And this is I could not be more excited about this. The Parasite's rule is one that we've always held back on, given it's got such powerful upside with exploding death of cards. However, realistically, that caution has meant that the Parasite has always felt a bit lacking. Especially originally. My god, it was pretty awful when it first launched. Well, the gloves are off. Do ovipositors need gloves? I'm not going to speculate on that. That's too deep. It's too. We'll leave that there. And instead of that initial attack slowing down play, it should now be the key alpha strike moment. And Tyranids having an alpha strike melee makes a lot of sense, especially in a warlord where the warlord itself is as weak as the Parasite. Parasite of Mortrex is not great on the battlefield until you get to extremely high level, and even then. And he's basically dead on arrival in PvP, so this is huge. Ooh. Ooh. So note also that makes Deathblow. If you play a Deathblow card against a bunch of cards that are not infected yet, you're going to do a lot of damage with that, which is really good. Love it. Tyranids mainly have a slower attrition playstyle, with most of their warlords, excluding Zemat. It was very weird that the most aggressive Tyranid warlord was Zemat, but I mean, she's Genestealer cult, so it kind of makes sense. So changing the Parasite into a much more aggressive playstyle should feel fresh and give more variety to the faction. I am so happy. And also just the Parasite is also extremely cheap. So being able to really get some actual benefit out of your Tyranid melee cards is so good. So many of my favorite cards have been held back by kind of the Tyranid warlords that didn't play with them very well. Either being too expensive, having different attack types, or not benefiting melee specifically, or being Gosar, which Gosar's not great. So I'm super pumped about this. Yeah, obviously. Then this one is a card I overlook because mine is level 2. This is the little cheap barrage card. As per the earlier commentary, this is Specimen... Barbgaunt. There it is. It's the Barbgaunt. Gets +5 base range. As per the earlier commentary on cheap barrage cards, a lot of players are reaching for them with underwhelming results. Yeah. Shaping these cards into much more high impact damage dealers for a turn rather than trying to get them to compete on durability makes the most sense. And that's very true. Tyranids have this weird barrage hole where they have a bunch of barrage cards at like the 14 to 20 points range, and they all kind of suck because they are priced as more durable cards but don't have the durability to justify that or the damage to get away with being actual glass cannons. This will help. This is great. And then you also encourage the sort of scuttling terror Tyranid playstyle. All of this is worse against Badruk, but Badruk is so much less of a meta threat than he ever has been before that I'm totally fine with it. Love it. This one, the Venom Thrope, has been reworked a couple times. It lost poison and gained anti-infantry, which is good, but it still doesn't compete on stats with all the other stuff around it. While anti-infantry is seeing a much higher win rate on cards than poison did, sure, it's hard to wrap your head around it still. It's a lot harder to pick out which cards are going to be targets for anti-infantry than it is to pick out which cards will be targets for big game hunter. Because cost is easier to measure than keywords. But it's a really high number of cards in the game have infantry, the infantry keyword, so it's a very strong trait. The uptake of them has been very cautious, yeah. The Venom Thrope is a good example of this, and while not originally overly popular, it's taken a step back further with its trait change. I basically took it for poison. So its win rate has stayed the same, so it's still at a good win rate, even with the... So the people who do play it have seen success. But a buff should make it a bit more tempting, and hopefully let more players give it a chance. Also combos very nicely with the buff to the Parasite, because that's a good chunk of wounds and a good chunk of melee on a relatively cheap card. Leagues Votan. No changes. And they're still good. They don't need it. They're new. They've actually been designed with the current philosophy of the cards that all of these other things are being updated to catch up to. So I think they're good, but yeah, we'll see. And I'm very excited for the next wave of releases. I know there's stuff coming, but I don't know how much it's going to be and when. This also is a really huge important piece. So there was a Q&A recently. The correct solution for call is something we're trying to get resolved at the moment. So they're doing a call rework to the Supreme Commander, Belisarius' call. Due to the nature of how his rule interacts with attacks, there's a fair bit of praying to the machine spirits involved to get a meaningful change to his mechanics. The key issue, the one that is driving these meta builds, is the interaction with AoE traits like Psionic Blast and Barrage. If you played in the last couple PvP campaigns where you played against call decks, it was pretty feels bad. I try to generally be very positive, but it's absolutely devastating when you're taking the insane amount of damage through fear, off lane, through shields. Yeah, call is too powerful right now. This specific interaction is what we'd like to address. However, it is the most difficult to change and has the widest implications that could break or interfere with other existing mechanics. So while we aren't able to commit to a timeline currently for a fix in that direction, it's very much on our radar. I appreciate that. We see this, we know it's a problem, we're working on it. That's great. What we can do in the meantime is remove him from PvP. So Belisarius' Call will no longer be available in PvP, which I feel good about. I always miss my boo Lilith in PvP, so it makes sense to have him removed from that. So given this is the key problem area, yeah, because he's very rare in ladder, it's fine. And we will be increasing his cost by 10 points. Whew, right, yikes. The intent will be to roll both back if another solution is rolled out. Nice. So this is a good hotfix, takes care of it for now, and we'll see. While not a wonder cure as an in-between, it should remove him from his most problematic area, whilst a more permanent fix is found. Awesome. There we go. Love it. Love it. I am so excited. This is going to be a great season, y'all. See you out there.